Okay, well, hello everyone. We have a special treat this morning. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man who walked on the moon, will be with us first with a video sharing and then live via Skype for about 30 minutes for discussion and questions and answers. So, Edgar, when he was on his return flight from the moon, and he was the pilot of the lunar module, but on the return flight he had less things, less responsibilities. And in looking out into the vast universe, he had an expansion of consciousness, a samadhi-like experience that changed his life, his whole worldview and his whole life. And I was with him in Florida, and he was talking about this. And then he showed this video that spoke about it in the fullest way, in poetic language, with pictures of the universe, pictures of outer space, as a backdrop for this. And it was so expansive. And it touched my heart. And I said, Edgar, there's this wonderful conference that I helped sponsor. Would you share this with everyone at the conference? And he said yes. And so I'm just so delighted to be able to have him be with us and have you hear his words. And then following that, we'll have our live Skype conversation with him. So let's get underway.
This is Captain Edgar Mitchell, U.S. Navy retired, lunar module pilot of Apollo 14, and your host for this story. Although I have recorded the story of Apollo 14 and my impressions of that flight elsewhere in another cassette volume, there was a particular experience that occurred on the flight that I think is worthy of a separate telling. It's a story all its own. It's the story of the powerful emotional experience that I had in space as I looked upon the beauty of our planet as it appears in the cosmos. It is the story of the effect on my thinking and my life as I came face to face with the deeper meaning of man's existence from the vantage point of being one of the privileged few to leave the confines of Mother Earth and to venture out into the void of space to see our world from afar. I would like to share that story with you. I would like for you to sit back, relax, and imagine with me the following scene. We're in the cabin of Apollo 14, having just left lunar orbit after a very exciting, fulfilling, and successful exploration of the lunar surface. The rugged moonscape is receding in the background, its features slowly becoming smaller as we watch out the cabin window. We are several thousand miles away now, and the little planet is clearly a sphere in our field of view. We are tired but exhilarated, not having eaten in 12 hours nor slept in 22 since before leaving the surface. Our mission in lunar orbit and on the lunar surface were both highly successful. We have completed all the assigned tasks and we're now on our way home, gratified, happy but relaxed, and very tired. The crew tasks are light, giving us a chance to rest, to make up the sleep deficit of the last few days, recover from sore muscles, and bask in the satisfaction of a mission well done. The spacecraft is small, but with ample room for the three of us to float around to our workstations in the weightlessness of space. A small amount of dust and debris float in the cabin, left over from the transfer of dusty pressure suits and equipment brought up in the lunar module from the moon's surface. It will be several hours before all those tiny loose particles are trapped by the filters in the air conditioning system. I take this opportunity to look out a spacecraft window to catch a glimpse of planet Earth, our home planet, as it moves past each of the 5 windows in turn, for we are rotating slowly like a beef on a barbecue spit to allow the sun's powerful rays to be equally distributed over the spacecraft. In fact, we call it the barbecue mode, even though the official name is passive thermal control, PTC for short. The official names are cold, technical, and usually tongue twisters, so we frequently use more familiar terms. I take the opportunity of the relaxed workload on the journey home to contemplate Earth, to view the little planet that is our spaceship, we the people of Earth. It is a rare event. I feel privileged to be one of the first of only a few persons in all history to leave the planet and be able to view it from afar, from deep space, to get out of the trees and see the forest, but of equal importance, to now have a few private moments to take in this scene and to muse upon its deeper significance. It's a beautiful little planet, blue and white, and set in the black emptiness of the universe, surrounded by billions of bright stars as a backdrop. Stars in such profusion, but which we never see from the surface of the Earth without a telescope, because our atmosphere screens out their light. This is a sight that bores deep into the soul and shakes the foundation of your being. Perhaps you have seen some of the photographs that my colleagues and I were able to take of planet Earth from deep space. Perhaps from those photographs, and with your imagination, you can capture the profundity and the magnificence that we saw from that vantage point. All of my adult life had been as an engineer, scientist, a test pilot, a naval officer, working daily with the equations of mathematics, exotic equipment, the hard facts of the technical professions, and the realities of war. It is accepted knowledge that we reside on a small little planet, circling an average sun way out on the spiral arm of a rather mundane galaxy, which is only one of the millions we can see in our telescopes. Distances are measured in light years, not in miles or even millions of miles. Those are the facts of our modern knowledge, most of which has been discovered within the last 100 years of man's existence. Facts that every school child of the space age learned in elementary school, but facts that my generation didn't really think about until adulthood, when they were thrust upon our professional lives. However, like many of you, throughout my life I have pondered the burning questions that have intrigued and troubled mankind for thousands of years, that have fueled the fires of our inquisitive searching, leading us in the 20th century to overcome the gravitational pull and carry out this venture to our nearest neighbor, the moon. Questions like, why am I here? What is our purpose? Are we simply a step above the animals? Are the planets and stars really formed by the accidental and random collision of bits of matter coming together in space because of gravitation? Is it really all an accident, or is there much, much more? Is indeed the universe created? Are we divinely created creatures? Is there a master plan that humankind and the other inhabitants of planet Earth are carrying out? I contemplated these questions while looking at the magnificence of planet Earth. Earth, floating in the vastness of space, a grain of sand in the cosmic sea. And as I did so, an experience occurred which firmly and completely calmed my mind on these troublesome questions. In an instant, I knew for certain that what I was seeing was no accident, that it did not occur randomly and without plan, that life did not, by accident, arise from the primordial earthly sea. It was as though my awareness reached out to touch the furthest star, and I was aware of being an integral part of the entire universe, for one brief instant. How magnificent, how perfect, how loving, how harmonious, how orderly was this universe that we inhabit. As tiny as our physical bodies are on the scale of the universe, our minds can reach out and become one with all it is. Any questions that my curious mind might have had about our progress, about our destiny, about the nature of the universe suddenly melted away as I experienced that oneness. I could reach out and touch the furthest parts and experience the vast reaches of the universe. It was clear that those tiny pinpoints of light in such brilliant profusion were a part of the plan. They were linked together as a part of the whole as they framed and formed a backdrop for this view of planet Earth. I knew we are not alone in this universe, that Earth was only one of millions, perhaps billions of planets like our own, with intelligent life all playing a role in the great divine plan for the evolution of life. This experience was euphoric, uplifting. Mystics would call it a mystical experience, psychologists a peak experience. Theologians would say it was touching the face of God. But none of those words quite do justice to the indescribable feeling of knowing for one instant that certainly life had purpose. The universe had plan, had direction, had harmony, was structured and organized, and not as a lifeless, inanimate machine on which we are accidental passengers. However, as I continued to gaze at Earth, the euphoria, the sense of oneness, of wholeness, of participation, changed into a feeling of deep despair, the darkest, blackest despair, the most agonizing emotional pain I've ever felt. As I contemplated man and his condition on Earth, behaving more like ancient warring tribes fighting over food and territorial rights, more like lemmings rushing toward the sea, more like spoiled children fighting over favorite toys than like the involved, enlightened beings with a destiny that I now knew we were. How painful to know that beneath that blue atmosphere and white clouds were my people, the crew of Spaceship Earth, in disharmony and disarray, egocentrically, lustfully, hatefully, greedily destroying themselves and each other for lack of vision, for lack of understanding of what mankind really is. We are universal beings. We are stewards and keepers of Spaceship Earth, not the spoiled, self-serving brats we often portray. A species not knowing our own potential, not sensing the omnipotence of God, nor the limitlessness of our creative capability, not recognizing our given gifts of intelligence, intuition, creativity, that the spirit within us is the guiding force that makes mankind great and enables us to rise above our more base instincts, to become the creative, intelligent, loving creatures of the universe that is our true reality, unwilling to rise above the angry, warring, self-serving mentality that so often directs our behavior. This despair was black and painful, but fortunately for me, my duties aboard the spacecraft interrupted these thoughts and caused me to return to my task and to function as a member of our homeward-bound crew. However, for the next 30 hours, in my moments of rest and in between crew chores, the experience was repeated. The high, the euphoria, the knowledge of man's oneness with God and his destiny in the universe, to be followed by the despair, the blackness of mood at the recognition that we are hurting only ourselves as we continue to ignore our potential, continue to ignore our higher nature and our spiritual selves in favor of the self-serving behavior that mankind too often indulges itself in. Buckminster Fuller's analogy, Spaceship Earth, appeared so apt. We of Apollo 14 were only three with the responsibility of conserving our resources, working as a team, following the flight plan if we were to return successfully to Earth. It is no different with Spaceship Earth, except the crew numbers billions, the craft is a planet, and the resources greater, but ample, although still limited and finite. It is clear to me that the crew of Spaceship Earth can no longer afford wastefulness, disharmony, and mutiny any more than we three could. For Earth to survive as a planet, and to provide for the nurturing, the growth, the well-being of the inhabitants, then we, humankind, must rise to the challenge of learning to be stewards to Earth and to each other, not the ravagers and pillagers of its resources, torn out wastefully for exaggerated self-serving desires. We need to work cooperatively with Earth, not as manipulators. We no longer can follow the patterns of our earlier, more primitive, infantile years on Earth. Patterns of the generations before, who believed because we were few in number, and the Earth was so large that its resources would last forever. Who believed, and we still believe, that conquest creates conformity, and threat produces peace. The sages and peacemakers who have dotted our history and helped pioneer the growth of knowledge and civilization, where has their message gone? For this vision says nothing that is new. The message is old, but still largely unheeded. The veneer of our civilization is so thin that it can be shattered worldwide by a single border dispute. No, it is quite apparent in the view from space how tiny, how fragile, how limited the Earth is if required to supply a civilization determined to destroy itself by misuse of its greatest gifts. In earlier times, our limited numbers and more primitive tools prevented our juvenile passions from endangering the entire world at once. Mother Earth and her species could absorb the violence of humankind's adolescent behavior. But our numerous and growing population has in the 20th century alone changed us from an agricultural, primarily pastoral world, dependent upon nature and the cooperation of nature for our survival, into a post-industrial, computerized, technical society. The nuclear space-age progress has certainly brought affluence and a way of life that primitive man could never have dreamed of. But we must pause and ask ourselves, are we using it wisely? We now have the power and knowledge to control Earth. But have we yet the wisdom and sense of destiny necessary to control the technological genie we have set free? Has the lid to Pandora's box been opened ever so little? Has the sorcerer's apprentice opened the great book of magic? Long after I returned to Earth in February of 1971, I pondered these questions and tried to understand the experience that occurred returning from the moon. I have sought the counsel of wise and gifted men, scholars, scientists, philosophers, mystics, and theologians, in an attempt not only to understand the insights, but to also reduce them to workable solutions. As humans, we all think our thoughts, dream our dreams, and have our visions of a better world, a peaceful place to live. But thoughts, dreams, and visions alone do not change the world. What they do is inspire us to a new sense of ourselves, to a new awareness of what can be done, and thus set the stage for the action that is to follow. It is appropriate to examine what has happened in that time. As a result of my view from space, I set out to find what is the potential of mankind for meaningful and productive change. What is it we can become if we but dare? The cynics say that mankind's nature will never change. We are born in passion, to war, to conquer, to seek power at the expense of others. The visionaries' dreams will inspire but not convince. They say to expect the human species to change its behavior is as futile as asking a leopard to change its spots. But what are we really? Is our nature truly just flesh and bones, a step above the animals? Or are we universal beings with great potential to determine our destiny? Along with many colleagues who share this same quest, I have rediscovered from ancient scholars and from personal experience a number of things about ourselves and about the universe that I would like to share. The human is not just an intelligent animal, born to struggle for survival, needing to defend its territory against all intruders, but a limitless spiritual creature, having a body with which to achieve its goals of learning and perfection. The picture of mankind painted by the sciences of medicine, biology, chemistry, and traditional psychology only describes our fragile physical machinery, not our essence, not our basic immortal nature. We are limited even in the body only by what we believe about ourselves. We function like 12-cylinder engines, operating on only one cylinder because we do not know what we are. That inefficient operation is only because we do not recognize that we have other great potentials. We are limited only because we think we are limited. We often say, seeing is believing, when precisely the opposite is true. Believing is seeing. When we change our belief, we will see ourselves differently. For tens of thousands of years, we have roamed the earth as nomads, fighting for survival in a harsh environment, protecting ourselves and our possessions, warring with those who seem to threaten. Only rarely have we listened to the inner voice that told us of our true destiny. Rarely have we followed the advice of the great sages and mystics who have dotted our history. More often we ignore that inner voice and that wise counsel, hearing what we want to hear, seeing what we want to see, to satisfy the desires of the moment. We have believed that life is hard, the environment threatening, and have thus made it so. We have felt lost and fearful, believing we are an accident beyond our control. This is why for me it was so important to experience the view from space. It helped me to experience a different reality. It settled in my mind once and for all that man is not an accident of the universe, and the universe itself a random occurrence of matter coming together in space. If we are here by accident, then life has no meaning, no purpose, and humankind and all the species on earth are indeed the victims of circumstance, are the flotsam and jetsam of the sea of existence without hope, without purpose, without destiny. But the experience of seeing beyond, knowing beyond, reaching out and being a part of a greater understanding, even if only for a brief instant, banishes the idea of an accidental origin. That there is purpose, that there is order and harmony in the universe, changes the entire way that we think about ourselves. You can rightly ask, does one have to go into space to have this perspective? Do you have to get out of Earth in order to see beyond and see a greater reality? Of course not. Our mystics, the philosophers, the great religious teachers of all time have been telling us throughout history of this experience. In the philosophic literature, it is called metanoia, our change of thinking. In our Christian tradition, Christ called it to be born again. In Hindu tradition, it's called samadhi. All of these words mean to change one's consciousness and to see beyond, to perceive the greater truth. It happened and has happened to thousands of people in every walk of life and in every age. That change of thinking that causes us to rise above our previous beliefs and to see ourselves in a different way, to see the world in a different way. It helps us to know that we're not the victims of the world and victims of our circumstances, but indeed if victims at all, victims of our own thinking. For generations we have believed that power, force, and fear were the only workable tools to motivate people and to shape a progressive world. We're now beginning to understand that such a belief creates only fear, hatred, and distrust, precisely the opposite of what is desired. A person or a society will behave in accordance with their self-interest as they perceive them, and their own belief about reality, born of their traditions, regardless of the external pressure that one puts upon them. In both personal and world affairs, we continuously use carrot-and-stick diplomacy, always projecting our version of truth upon others. We must learn it is not possible to make a person work against their deepest self-interest or violate their self-image. But the important lesson is that the only thing we can really change is ourselves, our view of what we are, our view of the world around us. To recognize that what we see, what we think, and what we do corresponds precisely to what we each believe that we are. The view from space is important to all because for the first time in human history, man has left the bonds of Earth and ventured deep into the void of space, leaving behind the limiting confines of our planet. This is not an individual triumph, but a turning point in evolutionary history. We have truly embarked upon a new era for mankind. If we are to become the explorers of space, reaching out from our tiny little planet to explore the immensity of the universe, then we must begin to think of ourselves as being capable of that. We must abandon the view of ourselves as provincial, limited victims of life, accidents of evolution, and start to view ourselves as limitless, capable of exploring the vast reaches of space, and capable of knowing what the universe is all about. Only then can we be prepared psychologically to live in this vast, confusing, and complex world we have created for ourselves. It is very likely that the fact of man's going into space and becoming space creatures as opposed to worldly, earthbound creatures may have more impact on our lives in the next 100 years than we can possibly foresee. I am reminded of an ancient verse that serves me well when I lose the perspective of our higher nature, for it describes the reality I want to see. It was originally written in Sanskrit and goes, God sleeps in the minerals, awakens in plants, walks in the animals, and thinks in man.
So this expansive experience that Edgar had, this expansion of consciousness, caused him to start the Institute of Noetic Science, to use science to investigate consciousness and to explain it. He already had a doctorate in science when he went into outer space, and so this was his natural field. And today, how many of you know about the Institute of Noetic Science? Yes. Well, it's really wonderful. And when I was with him in January, they are expanding the role of their research into science. And it's a great outreach. And they look into ESP and all these aspects of expanded awareness or extended awareness that really, as part of their perspective, is just part of being human. So this is who we are and what we are. And they're using the science to bridge this, to do the research and bridge this into the outer world, into the awakening public. Dean Radin is just wonderful. How many of you have ever heard Dean Radin speak? He's their lead scientist and is so amazing in taking science and putting it into plain English. And Edgar, hello. I was just talking, Edgar. So thank you so much for your expansive and wonderful universal sharings with us. Your global perspective and is so beneficial. So now, and so I'll let you say hello, and then we'll turn this over to Sheldon and Helena. We have many, many people here at our conference that want to talk with you and ask you questions. But if you have any preliminary hello remarks, we'll welcome that right now.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I hope I can hear you pretty well.
Well, I'll tell you what, we know that when you were in outer space, you made quick adjustments, and we'll just do that too, and we'll make the best of it. So I'm going to turn this over now to Sheldon and Helena, and we will invite people from our audience to come up with your questions and comments and discussion. And we're very lucky because we have Edgar for about a half an hour. So.
Well, this is Sheldon, Edgar. Thank you very much for that marvelous film. It's stirring for all of us here. Livia was asking earlier, is there anything you wanted just to say in terms of opening thoughts before we begin asking you some questions?
You're going to have to tell me which film you used, because I don't realize which one you were showing.
Okay, because we were going to call you earlier and we didn't, but it's the Messages in Space, where you shared about your expansion of consciousness.
Okay. My experience in space, sure.
Right. And
that was the beginning. That was, well, Dr. J.B. Ryan at Duke University helped us understand, in due course, that we're dealing with the quantum world, which we did not understand back in those days at all. And only only it's been developed through my Noetic Foundation and Dr. Ryan's work. And since that time, in the last 40 years, have we brought the quantum world with consciousness, with understanding of the psychic world. Let me put it to you a simple way. In the English language, we've called intuition our sixth sense, but it's really our first sense in the sense that it's rooted in the quantum world, which is more primitive and at a deeper level than the other things we call awareness. So all of us that went to the moon had a powerful experience of seeing Earth from that perspective. And it goes back in the ancient languages. In the Sanskrit, it was called Salvakapa Samadhi. In the Greek, it was called metanoia. In the Buddhist tradition, it was called enlightenment or satori. So these were things that the ancients knew in some way, but they didn't have a science explanation for it. They just knew it was a part of the human faculty. And only in our time, thanks to Max Planck and Einstein, that discovered the quantum world in the late 19th century and developed it in the early part of the 20th century. And during the latter part of the 20th century, we've come to realize it, that our intuition and even our language itself, our consciousness, is rooted in the quantum world. And that, of course, what my work has been in these last 40 years also. And it's delighted that we can now, here in the 21st century, start to explore these things in a far more deep way than we could before that. So back over to you.
Edgar, you mentioned Dr. J.B. Ryan, and this leads me to ask you to share about your ESP experiment that you did in outer space.
Yes, the work that J.B. Ryan had done at Duke University in bringing forth what we called in those days paranormal or psychic stuff. We now understand that it's just normal stuff. It's a basis of our awareness. And I repeated his experiment in space, and we got as good results, and he helped check the results when I got back. He and Carlos Osis in New York. We got as good a results at 100,000 miles out as he did in the laboratory right next to each other, showing that Einstein's concept, or rather our concept of non-locality in the quantum world, is the right concept. It works fine, and that we had utterly no problem. Just the very fact, just like when those of you that have dogs generally or pets, that'll meet you at the door when you come home, and essentially asking you, where have you been? That's the world we're dealing with here, and it's only did we get this into the science by the early part of the 20th century, and developed it here in the later part of the 20th century, so that we know what we're talking about a little bit when we're talking about psychic stuff as our first sense instead of our sixth sense. Okay, off to you.
And Edgar, the experiment you did, weren't you sending messages to people back on Earth, and they were able to pick them up? Wasn't that what was going on?
Right. I was repeating the Ryan work, but I was 100,000 miles out and more in space, and they were picking it up on Earth just as though it was in the next room. And Dr. Ryan and Dr. Osis in New York checked my figures when I got back home, and it showed as good a results as though we were next door to each other.
Okay, Edgar, if there are some people in the audience who would like to ask a question, so why don't you come up here? This is going to require coming up to the microphone, and we will...
I'll ask a few questions. Let's go.
Okay, good. Please join us. Yeah.
Hi. So, your video that you made me think about something that I learned in school from my teacher, Mr. Todd. And he said that reality is just how one perceives it, which can therefore not be validated. And so I thought, so if one believes there is purpose, there will be.
Sorry, young lady, you're breaking up. I'm not hearing you very well at all.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Try to slow down and speak directly into the phone.
Okay. So your video made me think of something that my teacher said in class. He said that reality is just how one perceives it, which can therefore not be validated. And so I thought that if someone believes that there's purpose, that there will be. And so I was wondering if you think that you found purpose in your life.
I'm sorry. I did not understand what you were trying to say.
So she was just saying that her teacher told her that reality was basically how you perceive it, and it can't be validated. So therefore, if you believe that there is a purpose, then there is a purpose. That sounds a little bit like what you were saying to us in your video.
Well, I would agree with that with regard to the definition of purpose. If you intend for it to happen, that's a purpose.
So I was wondering if you know if like what you found, like what purpose you found in your life, what really gave you that validation.
She's asking if you found your purpose.
If I found purpose?
Yes.
Well, my purpose has always been since my youth as a cosmologist, and that a cosmologist tries to understand what it's all about, how did we get here, where we're going, and how it all works. And this was just another part of the cosmology of how do we relate to each other and how do we communicate with each other, because what we're dealing with is information, and the quantum world has a more subtle area and description of information than our normal world. We write on a piece of paper, and that's information. In other words, the organization of energy and ideas is information. And what we're dealing with here and what we're communicating is information. And largely that's what, we didn't realize it, but that's what animals do. And we even know that it does so at the level of plants. They have an information structure themselves. And so that is just a part of the way we describe our universe or describe our world as human beings. We talk about information and how to communicate it. And that's what this is about.
I saw a video clip in which you stated that our government has recovered extraterrestrial spacecraft and bodies. I was wondering if this is something you've seen yourself, if you've heard from colleagues, seen documentation of. Would you be willing to elaborate on that at all?
Well, I cannot elaborate on it a great deal. However, I am very well versed in the field, although it's not my primary area of discussion and interest. I do know all of the good writers and research people in the United States, the Western world, South America, Mexico. And I have a library full of all their works, but I do not consider myself a real expert in the UFO or the ET visitation. However, there's not any doubt that they have been here and been coming here for a long, long time. But I'm not a primary investigator in that field. I rely upon others to do it because that's their interest. And but in any event, I assure you that I feel very comfortable that the ETs, that our universe is much bigger than we ever thought it was, that we can describe ourselves as one grain of sand on a huge beach, at least our civilization, and we're just a small part of an enormous universe that has living creatures in it, probably many, many types of living creatures, from the animal world up to a world like ourselves, And we're just now beginning to understand that in a fairly reasonable way, but we still don't have an awfully good handle on just how big it is. And our astronomers and our cosmologists work hard at this every time, but we have made great leaps and bounds here in the 20th and the 21st centuries, but we have a long way to go before we really understand the universe that we're in, or the universes that exist, that we're in one of them at least. Over to you.
Thank you. Matt, did you want to come up? Yeah, please.
Sure. Hello. In your talk, in your film, you linked intuition with quantum mechanics. I was wondering if that had something to do. You also spoke of non-locality. I was wondering if that had something to do with action at a distance, how two separate quantum particles can synchronize their spin over, light years.
Yeah. Well, that is all the subject matter of the quantum world, and I do not consider myself a real expert in the physics of it, although I'm quite well knowledgeable and I've read it all, but I'm not a primary researcher in that. But those of you that are interested, I will say that it's a very powerful aspect of our world, a fundamental aspect of our world, and only in the late 20th and into the 21st century are we starting to really get a handle on it as far as science is concerned. Next.
Thank you, Edgar. I am so impressed. Could you please tell us more things about what IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science, is doing currently today? You have a great expansion plan.
Okay, well, noetic sciences grew out of my experience in space, and the fact that I'd done the work with J.B. Ryan and done some of his experiments from space and found that distance didn't make any difference. And that, of course, is a good proportion of quantum mechanics and what's called non-locality, that particles that are in there in an entangled process and develop a relationship, that relationship remains intact regardless of where they go, at least as far as we know at this point. And that was what was my motivation in starting noetics 40 years ago. And I've done that experiments. I got good results from J.B. Ryan's work. And at the same time, a very powerful psychic by the name of Uri Geller was brought to this country. And I raised the fund to do research with him at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in California. We got good results. He's very powerful. He became an acquaintance, and over the years, he lives in England now, or at least the last I heard. And his ability to demonstrate mind over matter and the psychic stuff, it's parapsychological stuff, he's very, very powerful. And I did a lot of experiments with him and using Dr. Harold Putoff and Russell Targ at SRI. And that was sufficient enough to want me to start what we now call the Institute of Noetic Sciences, because it was clear that science in general was not prepared and had not been properly prepared or accepting of these type of phenomena, so-called psychic phenomena, or the quantum world, and recognize it as a valid part of the quantum world that was and has come into being and a better understanding during the latter part of the 20th century and now to the 21st. Next.
My question is, in the exploration with the Hubble Space Telescope and the satellites and their travel through the solar system and the universe, if there's been sound data collected that you might be able to use in your research as far as communication goes and frequencies between planets and stars?
sound itself does not propagate very well in deep space.
Okay.
We have to use our technology for that sort of communication, and that's because our sound, as we use it here on Earth, is dependent upon our atmosphere. And you go into a vacuum, and you do not get sound waves as we experience them.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for being here with us. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're not very clear. You'll have to stay close to the mic.
I'm right there.
Okay.
Many of us here are, believe it or not, astrologers. What do you think of the science of cycles, as we call it, the possibility of astrological investigation?
Well, I don't consider myself very, very knowledgeable in the area you're interested in, but I welcome your insights and welcome what you have to say, but that isn't an area that I've studied very heavily.
Okay, thank you, open-minded.
Hello, Dr. Mitchell, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you, go ahead.
You can hear me. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 9, but I don't think I would have been very good because I have a fear of flying. So I want to thank you for going. And I don't know if anyone's ever thanked you, really, for doing what you've done and changing science and our attitude towards this planet. As a teacher, as a geography teacher, I've tried to give children an appreciation for the beauty of this planet and our sacred duty to care for it. And I think that perspective that you've written about in this wonderful book would change the world.
Thank you.
And my question is, how can we give that perspective to the everyday man on the street?
Well, my motivation has always been that I learned from childhood with my parents, because they lived it, was to serve the greater good. Now, the greater good changes as we go along, and different people see different things. But I've had a wonderful career, a wonderful life, and things seem to open up for me at the right time. New ideas going into. I was in the military during the Korean War, flew a flying aircraft off of aircraft carriers, and I did all that during the 1950s, and all of a sudden, when Sputnik went up and NASA was formed, I happened to be at the right place in the right time to take advantage of that. It sounded like an interesting thing to do, and it worked out, so I've got to be a part of the astronaut program. And spent 20 years in the Navy and almost 15 years in NASA, and getting to go to the moon. I'm a very privileged person in that area to have had the opportunities that I had, and I was able to make the best of the challenges that were presented for me. But I believe that the major part of it is that my attitude has always been serve the greater good. And that is what we have to do now, because our civilization is not any longer, like it ever was, really on a sustainable path, because we're overpopulating and over-consuming, and at the moment we do not have the means to keep up that rate of population growth and consumption. We just don't have the mechanism to do it, and we've got to, all of us, put our minds to the fact of creating a sustainable society, and sometime in this 100 years, because it's not obvious that we can last another 100 years if we keep growing and consuming and exploding our population the way we have in the last 100 years. So I urge you to take that deeply in mind, and let's see what we can do with it, because it's going to take all of us working in the same direction in that regard.
Thank you. From the quantum perspective, and entanglement theory tells us that when we observe something, the act of observation has an impact and changes that which we are observing. From your perspective, looking at Earth from the moon, do you feel that you had an effect of change upon the Earth? And conversely, how did the observation of the Earth upon you change you in that relationship?
Well, I can give a quick answer to that. The quick answer is that all it did was deepen my concern to serve the greater good and to serve humanity, to help us survive, to prosper, to take care of each other and take care of our planet, and to understand it better. Because only in the last 20 years has our astronomy, our cosmology started to amplify to the point, as I said, we really are just a grain of sand on a huge beach. And beginning to understand that and to operate in accordance with that is what is coming out of our work right now. And it's a great pleasure to be able to serve in that way. And I urge you to take this all very seriously and do whatever comes to you as your service to the greater good.
Thank you, Edgar. There is a wonderful group of people here at this conference appreciating so much your words, your wisdom, your universal perspective, and really taking to heart what you say about serving the greater good. So we thank you so much for being with us and for inspiring us and sharing your great insight. I know you care so much about humanity. You care and you look at humanity with a global perspective, with a worldview always, and a beautiful heart. And indeed, you have prompted through the Institute of Noetic Science, using science to investigate expanded consciousness and awareness. And IONS is so outstanding, helping to change the world paradigm about so many things.
Thank you very much, and my best wishes to all of you.
Thank you, Edgar. Much love. Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye now.